Several months ago, we submitted several samples of loin and liver to Dr. Stephan van Vliet, and our good friend in South Carolina, Chris Berry, also sent a few samples in. And Dr. Van Vliet is world-renowned in studying meat and plants from a human health point of view, not just a standard nutritional label of protein and fat and salt, but looking at phytonutrients, where to find that, and all the other aspects that impacts human health. And I think you're really going to enjoy our visit with Dr. Van Vliet and his findings of how healthy wild venison is for the human diet. Dr. Van Vliet, thank you for joining us today. We've never met in person, but online through some mutual friends, and I was really intrigued by your work. But I noticed you hadn't been mentioning white-tailed deer. You'd mentioned axis deer and some other things, and there's bunches of species of deer around the world. Of course, here in North America, we focus primarily on whitetail. Western guys on muleys. Whitetails are certainly the dominant and most harvested deer. Millions and millions of pounds of venison consumed every year. So based on your work, I was really curious, what are we doing when we consume whitetails? And that probably varies by diet some. And everyone knows whitetails are lean and high in protein, but your work takes it so much deeper. So I want to get out here and let you do it. But why don't you share a brief summary about your work, kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and, give us a little background.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Grant. So I'm the director of the Center for Human Nutrition Studies at Utah State University. And our work is really focused on the link between regenerative ag and human nutrition. And in other words, do more sustainable production practices that improve soil health, that improve plant diversity, animal health. Do they also impact human health? Now, from that, we've studied a lot of grass-fed beef, grass-fed bison, pasture poultry, but also a thing that is probably quite related to that is wild animals, right? Because graze to an extent whatever they want to graze, and we'll be able to pick up a wide variety of plant compounds through their plant selectivity, because we found in our work on beef and bison that when the animal has access to a wider range of plants on pasture, it makes for a healthier animal, potentially a more tastier animal, although no flavor is subjective. But by picking up all these plant secondary compounds that become incorporated into the muscle and the liver of these animals, you create a healthier animal, but also potentially a healthier product for humans to consume. So that's when we really start to investigate in part through you. So thank you for that. Also, the impact of wild animals, in this case deer. And our work is really focused on, historically we looked at things like protein and fat, and we've kind of dumbed down foods to that extent. But protein isn't protein, and beef isn't beef even, and venison is also not beef. There's a large difference in terms of nutritional composition. So rather than just looking at the protein, we really start to look at the complexity of foods. Foods probably contain thousands of compounds that are capable of impacting our health. And a lot of those compounds, especially in the case of herbivores, are being picked up by the plants that they consume, which in turn the plants may contain 30, 40,000 different compounds that then become incorporated into the meat and give flavor and health to it. So that's really where our journey started. And we've been doing this work for quite a while now, both on livestock and crops.
Stephan, I know in a lot of your research, you talk about omega-3s and 6s, and I see that in a lot of media and stuff, but what's that really mean to a consumer of meat like me?
Yeah, so the omega-6 to 3 ratio, which is the proportion of omega-6s to omega-3s, is typically considered a good indicator of quality. Now, I know omega-6s have gotten a little bit of a bad rep, but omega-6s are also, several of them are essential to health, and omega-3s are also essential to health. But the problem in most of the Western diet is that our omega-6 to 3 ratio is out of whack. It's about 18 to 1, meaning we consume 18 times more omega-6s than we consume omega-3s. So we are over-consuming omega-6s and under-consuming omega-3s. So omega-3s are found in sources such as, well known for fish as well, right? Salmon and other fatty fish. But actually, various studies would suggest that grass-fed or wild meat Grass-fed has been studied much more, but we can infer from the omega-3 content of wild meat that they would also contribute, is that actually grass-fed beef and lamb can raise the omega-3 levels in the blood of people, even though it is lower than salmon. The reason probably is that the bioavailability is high when it comes from a whole food source, like venison or beef. And the other part of it is also just the way that people's diets are. People tend to consume more land animal foods than fish for the average American, right? Like, or the average Western person. Maybe there's exceptions if you live on the coast, but in general, our meat consumption is higher than fish consumption. So that contributes to health. And we do know that omega-3s are very important for our health. They can lower our risk of heart disease. They can lower our risk of things such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So lifelong exposure of these of omega-3s is a good thing. And again, we're under consuming these in the US diet. So if there's ways that we can increase them by increasing the omega-3 content of red meat, such as venison, such as beef, such as bison, that is a good thing.
That's fascinating. And there's a big movement. I know the guys at Understanding Ag and some other groups are really going in this. And just briefly, I think you've shown some major differences in the health of the animal and the meat we humans consume when you're looking at like a feedlot beef that's primarily fed grain or grain byproducts, and one that's out on a native pasture that has a very diverse plant complex in that pasture.
Yeah, that is correct. We've published several papers on this over the years. The latest one that came out about 2 weeks ago in Nature Science of Food. And in that particular work, which was a follow-up on previous work, we actually looked at animals finished in diverse on plant diverse pastures that are rich in that, and compare that to feedlot beef. And we noticed that besides the fatty acids, it accumulates more omega-3s in the grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat. We also studied the feed of the animal. So we went out to those farms, collected pasture samples, tested those, and then tested the meat. And then what we did, we overlaid essentially the nutritional profiles of the food or feed that the animals consume with the meat profile. And what we found is that especially in the fresh pastures compared to a total mixed ration, which is particularly rich in corn, and we also tested corn separately. But what you kind of found is that the pasture is very rich in antioxidants, in things such as polyphenols, flavonoids. Then you have the total mixed ration that is, in many cases, thousands of percent lower in these compounds. And then we tested just the corn, field corn that is fed to animals, and it is even lower than the total mixed ration. So the contribution of corn, while that is a very good source of energy and protein for the animal, it does not provide a lot of those antioxidants and polyphenols to the animal, which these have antibacterial effects, antimicrobial effects, antioxidant effects. So they have general health and well-being benefits to the animal, but flavonoids are also flavor compounds. So this is often referred to as maybe the terroir, the territory, right? And it's like, yeah, you can taste that. And that's why arguably venison and lamb, which is very rich in these polyphenol compounds, more complex flavor. I know I'm not trying to offend any people that like beef, because I'm also a beef eater, but typically would have a little bit more of a complex flavor profile. And in part is that because grass-fed beef is richer than grain-fed beef, but then if you study lamb and venison and goat meat, that is even richer in these compounds. And that, I think, is due to the plant selectivity of these animals, as we know from sheep and goats, that they consume more forbs and shrubs and like flowery plants, right, that are that are rich in that. And then with the deer also being more also browsers and as opposed to just consuming grasses.
Yeah, deer are called in our world, in deer science world, concentrate selectors. They eat the best and leave the rest. So if the habitat provides really good diversity, 100, 200 different forb species out there, they're picking the best and letting the rest go. And those rests may mature to a state where now they're preferred. It's all about the maturity of the plant also. So that's fascinating. Well, that's a great introduction. What did you find? We sent 17 samples, most of them from here at Proving Ground, some from our buddy Chris Berry in South Carolina. Chris's newer property owner, his habitat's not quite as diverse as here. And if you don't mind, let's just, overall, and then we'll dive into a little bit more. What did you find when you looked at our venison samples?
So what we found when we looked at the venison samples, the first thing that we studied were the fatty acid profiles, and what we found on those is that the omega 3s are considerably higher in venison compared to the feedlot beef samples, and even in some cases compared to grass-fed beef. I mean, venison is known to accumulate quite a bit of that as well. Their metabolism is slightly different also from beef animals. It seems like they concentrate more polyunsaturated fatty acids in general. What that means is that you get more omega 3s than typically beef, but you also get a little bit more omega 6s. But that ratio still stays very favorable because you get high levels of both. And I know omega 6s have gotten a little bit of a bad rep in the in the sort of modern days, and that is not because omega 6s are inherently bad. Several of them are actually essential for our health, but the problem, I think, is that we are over consuming these, and we're mainly over consuming these because we consume so much ultra processed foods and animal source foods as well that are rich in these. But the bigger problem, what we found in animal source foods, is not so much that there's more omega 6s in them, even in grass fed versus grain fed beef, because there's actually not that much more omega 6 in grain fed beef, but it's really the absence of omega 3s that is problematic. Those are a lot lower, and so venison, we found, is a very good source of that. And then we also started recently study the phytochemicals in these samples as well, and that's a project we'll finish up this fall as part of we're hoping to do so as part of a thesis for one of the students. And what we're also seeing is that venison is amongst the most phytochemically rich meat as well. And what phytochemicals are essentially the 99% of the compounds that are in plants that are not protein or vitamins, but these are things such as polyphenols, which perhaps many audience members would know is like, oh, I eat blueberries, I get polyphenols. If I drink, I get polyphenols, right? But actually, the animal, when they consume plants, also gets these polyphenols, and it turns them into what we call mammalian antioxidants. Essentially, what the animal does, it processes them in the gut and in the liver, and it becomes available in very much similar forms as us, because we ultimately are also mammals, right? So so it's kind of like a pre-processing way that the animal uses, and so it's another way of getting phytochemicals in our diet, these flavor compounds, these health compounds, from plants that you and I would otherwise never consume.
Yeah, we're not walking out there and eating a ragweed plant or something like that. So a deer that has access to good habitat, maybe there's been prescribed fire or whatever, that stimulated the growth of many of these native forbs, and then we consume that deer, we're getting the benefits of, could be 10 or 100 different plants in that venison. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. And we know from that many of these plants have certain medicinal benefits, but they may have also, due to their cellulose or lignin profile, we are unable to digest them.
Yes.
So then if the animal is able to consume them, and it's just another avenue of getting phytochemicals in. Of course, a carrot is a better source of beta carotene than venison is. But my point being is that it's another way of increasing the phytochemical richness within our diet through the animal source foods that we consume. And what is really unique about it, and we do need more human data on that because this is more of a newer finding. But what we're finding is that a lot of the compounds that appear in venison, these antioxidants derived from polyphenols, are in similar versions within our body. So that could perhaps be a benefit. We don't know that yet, but that is the working hypothesis that the animal processing this is a good thing.
So my takeaway on this is, and thank you for sharing all that and breaking it down so I and others can understand it, is venison, especially from good habitat, is extremely healthy. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah,
For human consumption.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's incredibly nutrient dense. That I know. I'm not actually familiar with any studies at the moment, and maybe there's a few that actually studied human health outcomes to venison, but we can glean from the research, at least I would say. I mean, people have studied grass-fed beef and grass-fed lamb, and particularly found that the omega-3 levels in the blood of people would go up after regular consumption, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because over time, omega-3s should protect us from things such as heart disease and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and just to help with our overall well-being. Um, so that's a good thing. And then, the other thing that we're trying to study now, and we're doing this in the context of grass-fed beef, pasture, poultry, and pork, is, well, what about the other compounds? Are these foods able to move the needle on some other metabolites as well, besides just fatty acids? But so while I don't have like a human health study to point to, like, that says like, okay, this is really healthy for consumers based on the nutrient density of venison, which is very high, I would say yes, this is a product that has potential health benefits to the consumer.
Would you be comfortable in saying, after all your review of this data, that it's better than the average feedlot beef that most consumers buy at a store?
Yeah, it's more nutrient dense for sure. It is more
Yeah.
nutrient dense than feedlot beef, and depending on the compounds, it is also more nutrient dense than some grass-fed beef samples. But
Wow.
acknowledging that there's tremendous variation among grass-fed beef, and that's we recently did a study called the Beef Nutrient Density Project in collaboration with the Bionutrient Institute, and we studied about 350 grass-fed beef samples from ranches all across North America, so Canada and the US. And what we found was in many of these phytochemicals, we found a 10x variation of it. So compared
Oh,
to
wow.
the lowest. So there's definitely some grass-fed beef producers that produce very phytochemically rich beef that almost looks like venison. And but on the average, we'd say that venison is, and it's also just due to plant selectivity.
Yes.
It's just because we've tested a lot of lamb as well now. Started to test some goats, and just in general, these are higher in compounds that are derived from polyphenols.
You noticed a difference in our earlier harvested deer, which were probably eating more forbs. And then once acorns hit the ground, acorns somewhat similar to corn, high in carbs and energy, lower in other things, not as diverse as a heavy forb diet, that quality dropped off a little bit. Could you address that just briefly?
Yeah, that's right. We were looking at this data, and I was kind of scratching my head on like, why do these deer look different than others? And I think even during our conversation, it took about 15, 20 minutes for us to kind of figure that out. So that was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely not call acorn finished. I wouldn't want to compare it to maybe feedlot or corn-fed beef. It doesn't per se look like that, but you
Yeah.
can tell, yes, that the animals that were out on the forbs and shrubs early on in the season, which may be the equivalent of a pasture-based diet, right?
Right.
These were typically a little bit higher in omega-3s. The phytochemical richness is improved on those. And then if you look at it later on, we saw a little bit of a shift of getting more omega-6s in the meat.
Yes.
And we were not 100% sure why that was the case. But then I think it was you or one of your colleagues who said, well, when we harvest the animals and look at their stomach contents, we estimate that maybe 80% what's in their stomach is acorn. And we do know from acorns, while they are typically richer in phytochemicals than typical corn, right? And this is also why people feed in Spain feed Iberico pigs
Right.
corns, right? Because it still fattens them up. It results in this flavor, but it's a little bit more nutrient dense than just your typical field corn. But so yeah, it almost started to look maybe like an Iberico deer. So yeah, we definitely saw a shift in that. So it's a preference of flavor, I think, and I don't know if that's something you can attest to, Grant. I mean, maybe they get a little bit fatter when they consume acorns. I'm not sure.
Definitely store more fat on the body when they shift to that acorn-driven diet. And I should mention earlier, both Stephan and I searched the web, looked all over. We're not aware of another sample size this large that's ever been tested like this. This is, as far as we know, the first research like this on white-tailed deer in the world. And I think, again, it's important because there are about 11 million deer hunters. You know, that number goes up and down each year. and millions of pounds of venison consumed. And just some stuff you just shared, a lot of states have too many deer right now. Deer populations are high. We need a bigger doe harvest, a reproductive unit. And hopefully this data will, me included, help encourage us to harvest more does during the early season when they're eating that forb-based diet. Because a lot of hunters, they say, oh, I'll get those does later on. And then, football comes on or gets cold or whatever, and they don't get that doe harvest. So that's great information. What's your takeaway from looking at this venison from your seat, a scientist that deals with all kinds of animals and the profiles in human health? Because I think due to our new Secretary of Health, of course, Mr. Kennedy and all the stuff he's publishing, there's a bigger interest in this now. And people are realizing that bag of XYZ branded chips or whatever, probably not the best thing to be popping in your gut every day.
No, for sure. That's definitely the case. And in that case, I would argue that any unprocessed food that you can eat would be a lot better. And but yeah, what we found was on sort of a sliding scale, because we often refer back to this to other animal sourced foods on this, so other types of meat. And yeah, we have found that venison is amongst the highest that we've tested in terms of phytochemicals, and also in terms of various minerals. So it's also typically richer in iron and zinc. And yeah, so I would say venison, it's amongst one of the most nutrients dense meats out there. So if we can stimulate more consumption of it, I think that's and it's not to say that even though the phytochemical profile of venison is 2-3 times higher than grass-fed beef on average, that it means that grass-fed beef is unhealthy to consume or something like that. That's not what studies found. And in fact, even if we pull it even further, Grant, is that we have done studies where we just took people off of a standard American diet and just start to feed them fruits and vegetables and minimally processed animal source foods, even if this came from feedlots. People get a lot healthier just because the standard American diet is so poor. And within that, we hypothesized that eating pastured or wild animal source foods can provide additional health benefits over time that may not play out in a 6-week randomized controlled trial, but potentially 20-30 years of exposure to higher levels of phytochemical antioxidants could lower our risk of metabolic diseases, though, although that would be very hard to prove out, but we can hypothesize that based on the nutrient density data.
I think that's so important. I'm glad you shared that, because Mr. Kennedy and others recently, that this tidal waves kind of start happening, have said, and I'm trusting this is based on research somewhere, I do not know this for sure, but up to 80% of the common diseases in America could be avoided or reduced in intensity by changing diets. That's significant from every metric, just how people feel and what we can do and enjoy life, to the cost of healthcare in America. I mean, everything in our country is based on human health. And as simple as adding venison to the diet in place of maybe some lower quality foods could certainly be a step in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. And venison being a very nutrient dense source, because besides that, also we have, the U.S., we are over consuming energy, but probably are under consuming micronutrients and then phytonutrients, which we are broadly classified as antioxidants, right? Because we're consuming enough food. We've dealt with issues of, I know this is not across the board, so I'm talking in because we definitely have food deserts and we have under consumption of calories in certain areas for sure. But by and large, we don't have the large hunger anymore that maybe we had in early post-war years, for instance, right? We were producing enough food in the US in general. But yes, the quality of our food needs to improve for sure. And one of the issues is indeed, at least what we're finding in our initial work is ultra processed foods for sure, because you strip away a lot of those nutrients as well. And the other issue, and of course it's twofold, is that we're not consuming a lot of whole foods, and the whole foods that we're consuming are oftentimes considered to be bland and not as nourishing and things such as that, right? So if we can improve the flavor profile, the healthfulness of these foods, and that would be a good step in the right direction, because we do know that a lot of these compounds, these phytochemicals, they have antioxidant effects. They have diabetic effects. They improve our liver health. They improve our cognitive function. They can have anti-cancer effects. So if we can, and those are the metabolic diseases that we struggle with this
Sure.
day and age. So if we can increase the richness of that within our diet, that is a good thing. And then another issue that's on the rise in particular is also deficiencies or insufficiencies, I should say, because it's the gray area in iron and zinc, mainly due to a reduced consumption of red meat, and particularly in women of childbearing age, that is a growing problem. We know venison and other wild meats are particularly rich in those key
Yeah.
nutrients, even for young women or women of childbearing age. That is also an excellent source of consuming that.
And Stephan, I think I've shared with you, I've had a kidney transplant for 32 years, two of them, one 32 years ago, one 7 years ago. And my diet in grad school, of course, I had access to a lot of venison on projects and as a hunter, and I was poor, so I consumed 99% venison or something like that as far as a meat source, and have continued that. And my wife and my two daughters, my oldest daughter is one of my kidney donors, we've all been blessed with just great health. And I can't go back and say, but every year when I go to the Mayo Clinic for my, annual physical and kidney checkup and all that, they always have to meet with the nutritionist or dietitian. They say, "Hey, what have you been eating?" Well, I eat a lot of venison for my meat. I don't eat much poultry or stuff like that. And they say, "Well, we don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it because your blood profiles are amazing for a 64-year-old that's had a kidney transplant 32 years." I cannot prove this, I don't have any data, but in my mind, that long-term venison healthy diet has played a big role in my health.
Yeah, for sure. We know that besides genetics, we know that diet is an incredibly strong predictor of chronic kidney disease. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
indeed, like I said, we cannot tell with 100% certainty, but yeah, I mean the fact that they would tell you like whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Is at least anecdotal evidence that. This is likely consumed. And like I said, we also don't have any human nutrition studies to point to at the moment. But if I just study the nutritional profile of venison, yeah, I cannot conclude anything else that this is amongst the most nutrient dense meats that there is.
Yeah, and I want to kind of summarize this, but again, most of these samples were from my place. As you know, we work with Keith Burns at Green Cover, so we're planting really diverse cover crops or food plots twice a year. We plant a warm season crop, and we drill right through that. We don't plow our soil. We do really strict regenerative ag, minimal, if any, herbicide. I don't think we've had a herbicide on food plot like 4 years or more. So our soil is really good, even though we're in a rocky mountainous area. Our soils are really good, and then a lot of native vegetation. And we are not saying that every piece of venison might be as good as what you found in these results. And I hope we can extend this research to get some venison from my friends in Iowa or somewhere like that, where it's intense ag, tilling the soil, spraying the crops 4 times a year. And I'm sure it's still high quality meat, but I'd like to compare what a more natural or regenerative ag diet does to the deer meat quality versus a high production ag area.
Yeah, I think that's very worthwhile to study, especially if the animal's consuming more crop residue and things such as that, right? That's very, because we did see that the needle could shift just based on the acorn versus forb fed animals. So yeah, I'd love. I think that's a great project and much needed in the future.
Yeah, and I'm going to be bold enough right here. I'm going to ask state agencies or even some of our sponsors to step on board and chip in towards this research. Again, no one's making money here. This is just, but if we can encourage more hunters to look at venison as the trophy, not antler size, but venison is the primary trophy. You want to be a provider of really high quality food for your family, and venison can be a great tool to do that. And by the way, and I have several friends that are regenerative ag beef farmers, and they're great guys, easy to rotating chickens and lambs, everything in there. But it's expensive. We can't deny that. And if you're going to be hunting anyway, utilize all that meat. Don't waste any of it, for goodness. And even value that meat, because it's just could be a really important part of your family's diet.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's one of the key parts also, just talking about diet or animal source foods intake in general. What we know or what we're finding is that uh, diversity is important. Diversity within a diet is also one of the strongest predictors of health. Is dietary diversity, and oftentimes we and maybe this, of course, this is a valid discussion. Is one of them is that what if we put all animals out on pasture? Do we have enough land, right? And maybe we don't. I mean, it's really hard to model these things, and how it's mainly modeled is in more simplified forms, because like the farmer that you described that produces chickens, that produces pork, that produces beef, all from the same lands in a rotational grazing pattern, you produce more pounds of food per acre, right? And if you then incorporate bees maybe into it, and you have honey, or you maybe have some crops as well, human edible crops, right? So then those things are really hard to model. But okay, if there is a high population of venison, and this is another way by which we can provide healthy foods to the Americans. I think that's an excellent way of doing it, and I think that is something we ought to do in that case.
And cast hunters in a light of not just trophy seekers, but providing really high quality food for the family. And that's just going back in time, right? Because imagine the health of the critters some of the early pioneers were eating on a really diverse diet, a lot of wildfire, lightning strike fire, and whatnot. And they're working. I'm a geek. I like to read a lot. And like, if you actually read, not watch the movie Lewis and Clark journals, I mean, they're pushing great big boats upstream 16 hours a day. Imagine the workout that is. I mean, and then they were eating almost a pure meat diet, wild meat, of course. And a lot of that was elk and venison. And then as they got into the prairie, bison. These are all grazing animals eating a very diverse diet. And the workload these guys were doing is just almost incomprehensible to our work schedule today.
Yeah, no, it is. I also like to read a lot about the first explorers here out west, and I should say white explorers, because I've Americans been here for a long time, and even then, if you look at that, right, like incredible hunters and very healthy people historically, but yeah, also reading a lot about the first European Americans that moved out into the West and mapped it out. Yeah, I mean, those were the modern day sort of Ironman athletes, right? And if you see what these guys do, it's quite amazing. And yeah, no doubt because of their consumption. And I also like a quote that I often refer to from that's a book from the 1800s from Warren Angus Ferris, and he mentions that when he interacted with the native peoples, and he mentions that during the grazing season, the bison were of such incredible taste and flavor that they required no plant foods or seasoning, and they found this incredible rich flavor profile. And then the other point that he says, when the animals were on poor grasses, or he says the worst diet imaginable, their flesh was also very poor tasting. Where I picture that is the modern day equivalent of maybe some overgrazed monoculture.
Yes.
It's a very diverse polyculture, and that's why obviously there was also seasonal hunting of bison, right? Because you knew if you got a bison in the dead of winter, it would not be nearly as nutrient dense and flavorful. And I'm pretty sure 200 years fast forward, he's referring to the phytonutrient profile of these bison that were just on the Great Plains on these vast swaths of plant diversity, and their statement was that much like the native peoples, they could rely on those almost exclusively.
That is fascinating, and I think it ties into what you found from our early season harvested venison to the acorn-driven venison. You're going to continue this research. May we join you maybe next spring or something, get an update on this?
Absolutely, yes. We will move forward with just at least as any funding is pending, to at least gather pilot data on the phytochemicals as well.
Yeah.
And we've started on those as well within just part of our normal workflow. So yes, absolutely. Let's
Find on that, yeah. And Dr. Van Vliet, where can people find out more about your research? Is there a website or something people can learn more about what you've got going on?
Yes, both my personal website, StephanVanVliet.com. So that's my name. And then also, if people just Google me, Stephan van Vliet, Utah State University, they'll find tons of webinars as well, or other podcasts, and where maybe you don't talk as much about venison, but I do talk about our work on grass-fed beef, on pastured bison, as well as our work that we've done on crops. So we study both animal source foods as well as crops from more agroecological systems as well, to hopefully improve the tastefulness and the healthfulness of our plant foods as well. So those are good areas to start, or type my name into YouTube and you'll find different content as well.
Well, you've taught Daniel and I a lot and really helped us and made me feel even better again about being a provider of healthy food for my family and friends. And I look forward to that follow up. What would you like to leave us with? What summary or what would you like to share with us?
Well, I think the main finding is that venison is an incredibly nutrient dense food, and that I think we should cherish that meat and the animal that has provided that food, and have a deep appreciation of that. And that's I think what the main takeaway is from this work so far.
And I agree as well. And it's a huge resource. And I encourage all of us sportsmen and non-sportsmen to be good conservationists and protect that resource. It's highly valuable for the nutritional good of our nation, besides the recreational and just seeing a deer. Who doesn't like just seeing a deer, right? I've been in the deer business my whole career, and I'll still about drive off the ditch when I see one out in the field somewhere. So
Yeah.
a lot of value there. Stephan, thanks so much for your time and sharing your work with us. We're looking forward to reconnecting some months down the road when we got a little bit more to share.
Thank you so much, Grant.
I am always amazed that detailed scientific research always points back to the Creator's way is the best. In this case, healthy habitat with the diversity of plants, minimal chemical input, produces the healthiest meat we can consume from a human health point of view. Well, that same is true for our lives. When we stray from the Creator's plan, things usually don't work out too well. And that's why I always encourage everyone to seek the Creator's will for your life and apply it daily. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.